This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
We wish we knew about Sporks and Lowbowls when we first started helping our care receivers with eating.
We sure do.
Today, we are covering 7 tips to help you help your care receiver with eating and drinking. You ready to get started?
I am ready to get started.
Good.
Welcome. We are Sue Ryan
And Nancy Treaster.
This podcast brings our years of experience in a variety of family caregiving roles to prepare you to navigate your caregiving journey.
We're sharing our personal experiences, not medical advice. And because it's our passion to support you on your journey, we believe no topic is off limits.
We're bringing you practical tips
And candid conversations.
about the good, the bad,
And yes, the ugly.
in family caregiving.
Let's get started.
Our goal with the eating and drinking throughout the caregiving journey is that as often as possible, we're doing everything we can to help them maintain their independence and their dignity. And this goes from observing them. And the reason that we're observing them is for us as well as for them. And then we're going to gradually start prompting and interjecting ourselves and then ultimately taking over the process completely.
Exactly. How about tip 1?
Tip 1. Well, since we talked about observing, tip 1 is observing.
Brilliant.
Brilliant. One of the things that I found really, really helpful is observing our loved ones' natural way of eating, the pattern they use, if they drink while they're eating, if they drink before, how they want their food on their plate, how they eat, how they cut their food, all the things. And it is as much for us to be able to support them throughout the process as long as possible. It's to support us as we go through that process of gradually injecting ourselves and then ultimately taking over the feeding. And then there are going to be times when somebody else is feeding them.
Of course.
So us being able to prepare them to provide the best level of care.
And it'll cause less frustration.
Much less.
And less angst if the care receiver is getting fed or eating in the same way they normally eat. All right. So tip 2.
Tip 2.
Tip 2 is about pre-made meals, and also an opportunity when your loved one's going to be alone and no one's there to ensure that they're eating. You'll notice some of the early signs is just preparing the meal is a struggle, getting their own meal pulled together.
Right.
So early on, you may leave meals if no one's going to be there to prompt them about or put it together for them and put it in front of them. You may leave a sandwich in the refrigerator. If you do, leave it at eye level so it can be seen. Maybe leave a note on the refrigerator that says there's lunch in here. Maybe preset the table and where the plate goes, leave a note there.
Yeah.
Do what you can to prompt and support their continued independence and their dignity, but also make sure that they've got food to eat. Same thing with when I was traveling, pre-made meals for the evening. And some people who are supporting people who are living independently continue to put pre-made meals in the freezer. So I was doing that when I was traveling. I'd have pre-made meals in the freezer. And for months, this worked perfectly. My husband would go to the freezer. He'd get his dinner. It's already proportioned. Put it in the microwave.
Good to go.
His dinner. He's good to go. My best friend lived a few houses up the street. She'd come down around dinner time. She'd just check on him without saying anything. She's making sure he's gotten his dinner out of the freezer, and he's microwaved his dinner and he's actually eating something. Until one day he wasn't. She called me and she said, okay, well, I got down there today. I asked him, he didn't have his dinner out. I asked him where his dinner was. He said he didn't have any food.
Did
not only not know that there was such a thing. And then when I told him about, well, there's food in the freezer, didn't know anything about it. No idea about the whole process.
Or how to microwave.
Nothing. So that, of course, was the end of that.
Yes.
So pre-made meals are a way to, at the beginning, be supportive.
Right.
But that's eventually going to go away as well.
That's eventually going to go away. And one of the things, so tip 3 on the pre side of it is we can also then pre-cut their food. And it's really important to start pre-testing their food. So as the diagnosis progresses, they're going to struggle more with some of the food. They're going to struggle with cutting it into bites. So we want to start observing where they stop eating or where they're struggling eating and continue to adjust. So one of the things that you do is you will have more finger foods. You take the knife away in the beginning so that there are fewer things for them to do to get in the way of the process of eating. And you cut the sandwich in, for example, in quarters. So make it another thing that happens in many of the dementia diagnoses is that hand stability begins. Your husband
has essential tremor.
Essential tremors. Grip strength diminishes. Their vision changes. Their hand-eye coordination changes. Their depth perception changes. And so there are a lot of things that impact their ability to eat. And then finally, one of the things you may want to consider is they can't tell you if something is too hot or too cold. They don't really know that it is. And then there was something else that you had observed about cutting the sandwich in smaller bites.
So for some reason, this is both with my husband and my father-in-law, a whole sandwich was too daunting.
Yeah.
And they'd quit after a few bites. But if we cut the sandwich into fourths, they would eat the whole thing.
Okay.
All right. So tip 4 is about cleaning and simplifying the area around them and cleaning the cleaning process.
Yes.
So I told Sue, my first recommendation here is just get a dog. So, I don't have a dog.
And I said, not so much.
But just like
maybe a Roomba.
That's a good idea. So, just like obviously a child, we already talked about there's depth perception problems. So getting the food all the way to their mouth begins to be a challenge. Holding the utensil correctly so that it doesn't fall off is a challenge. Getting the food specifically onto the plate. We talk about Lowbowls and the wish we knew, but just making sure it stays on the plate and doesn't fall on the floor, also a challenge. So there's going to be more mess at this point. You need to try to just relax about that. Be okay about that. Yeah. This is just a natural part of the process. There are things you can do. You can get bibs. If you think that your loved one would be okay with that, try a bib.
They have beautiful bibs. And if they're resistant to it earlier in the journey, they won't be later in the journey.
And it can catch some of the food. My mother, because my dad had Parkinson's, would put a towel in his shirt just to keep the mess, as much mess off him as possible. Because obviously they have tremors and such. You can put a towel in the chair because the chair is going to be a mess at some point. Things are going to fall in the chair. You can get a dog for the things that are on the floor.
You're committed to that dog, aren't you?
Or you can just reach around and keep some paper towels close by so that you can pick up things so nobody's stepping on them on the floor. But just be ready. This is not going to be the cleanest part of your journey.
No. And we talk a lot through everything we're talking about in the caregiver's journey about giving ourselves and our loved ones grace. This is a huge area for grace, both for them.
Yes.
Because like you say, if they could eat correctly and keep it on their plate, they would want to do that. Let's go on now to tip 5.
Okay.
Which is simplify their participation. So now we are injecting ourselves even more in order to help them, again, remaining independent and having dignity as long as possible. And we're going to just continue on this observe and adjust. We've talked about serving finger foods. Now it's even harder for them, even though the foods have been simplified, either cut in bite-sized pieces or the finger foods, to have them actually be able to pick it up on their spoon or their fork or be able to keep it on their plate. And so we want to simplify that as much as possible. Depth perception and vision. So separate each kind of food so they can see what it is they're eating. And then there's Nancy's tip, which I really wish I had known about.
This was very helpful. There's something that are called Lowbowls.
Well
Low.
said.
Thank you. Sue already made fun of my Southern accent once when I tried to say it earlier. So Lowbowls, and these are not plastic, but I think I think plastic cups is critical, and maybe at lunch, with sandwiches on something. But if they're trying to push food on their plate and they need a lip to push against, you probably don't want it to be too light. So these are, normal bowls. I mean, they're plate size bowls, but they have like a inch or so rim around them. And just Google Lowbowls, and we'll put it in the show notes as well. And then when they're using their spoon or their fork and they need something to push up against, the edge of the bowl is there. It's really their plate now becomes a low bowl. It looks just like a plate but with a little lip on it. Also sporks. My husband was stabbing things with his spoon and scooping and having with his fork and having everything fall off of it, and then pushing up against the side of his plate. And of course, everything's falling off the plate. So sporks, I was thinking, surely we can solve this.
Sure.
So I thought of sporks, but I'm thinking the old plastic sporks you used to get when you went to Kentucky Fried Chicken, right?
That's not going to work.
No. But I found on Amazon metal tablespoon size sporks.
Fabulous.
And I just wish I'd thought of them earlier, because I only got a couple much use out of them. And if I'd introduced them way early in the process, he would have been able to enjoy his independence a bit more. But that solves this stabbing and scooping problem. And the funny thing is, I still use those sporks all the time.
Well, they are pretty handy.
They are.
One of the things you said that reminded me of something that we started doing is that with the plate, I got Grippy placemats.
Yeah.
So that the plate was not just on the table moving around. So whether it's a paper plate or a plastic plate or the low bowl, there's a grip, so it really doesn't move quite as much. So that was really very helpful as well.
Idea.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Tip 6. All right.
Go.
This one is a really, really important tip that there's going to be a lot of shifting with throughout their journey. And it is helping figure out how much they need to eat. Part of the reason it's a little bit more complex is that it's not the same for everyone, and it shifts over time. And as your example is going to highlight, it could just all of a sudden start happening and you don't know why.
Right.
Our disclaimer on this tip is that neither Nancy and I are medical professionals. If you notice a sudden weight gain or a sudden weight drop in your loved one, talk to the doctor.
Yep.
And actually, Nancy, why don't you go ahead and give your tip, and then we'll go through that, because this was really important.
All of a sudden, my husband's eating the same amount he always ate. And within a couple of months, we looked at him and I said, does anybody else think he's lost a lot of weight? I mean, he just looks so much thinner. And we kind of all agreed that he had really lost weight within a couple of months. It was amazing. So we called the doctor. They came and tested, and they took blood and checked him for a thyroid problem and some other things that I can't remember. But, I know, diabetes and some other things. And all his blood work was fine. So the nurse said, effectively, there is brain chemistry changes with dementia that are unexplained, but it can cause them to just lose weight.
Yeah.
So,
or gain weight.
You know what? Or gain weight. That's, well, I'll finish my sentence, and then that's actually a good point. And so we literally started increasing the amount he ate by about a third at every meal. We added a fourth meal. We had a snack at 3:00 that's cake and pudding. And we just added a lot more calories to his day because we couldn't explain it. And he stabilized, which is good. Now, on the dementia support Facebook page that I'm on, it's really interesting, but half the people are complaining their loved one won't eat anything.
Yeah.
And the other half are complaining their loved one's eating them at a house and home.
Right.
So when Sue says this is complex, this is not one
it's
where
a moving
we've seen
target.
some real commonality amongst our care receivers.
Yeah.
And you even have your care receivers were different.
They were. It was a lot different. So my grandmother ate like a bird. My dad always had a very high metabolism. And so it was making sure that we kept him within a couple of pounds and made sure that when we moved him into memory care, they understood that he needed to eat every few hours. There was no medical. We did have him checked medically there, but that was just the way that it was. Now, here was the thing with my husband, and this was one of the things that I asked about. So when you're going to move your loved one into a continuing care community, I asked them about the nutrition side of it. I said, how do you determine what the food is that they get? What are the kinds of meals that they can have? What are your policies and things like that? I also asked, I said, what is traditional within the first 2 months for somebody in memory care and gaining or losing weight? And so I had all of that information. My goal, I'm the primary caregiver for some things, and then I'm a care partner for others. So being the best care partner with those who are going to be feeding him, part of it's the instructions and things like that. And part of it was making sure that he was not going to be gaining weight, which would make him harder for them to care for. And so we put together a nutrition plan for him that would give him all of the right kinds of things and treats and things, but that everybody would understand the kinds of foods that we're going to eat to help keep his weight stable. So we made sure we weighed him and kept his weight very stable. So that was on the eating side of it. And then on my side of it, I also, some mornings I was there for breakfast, sometimes at lunch, afternoon snack, dinner. So I am helping them monitor, because with different people coming in to cook and serve and the things, that they were getting those instructions. The other side, we're talking about feeding. There's also the hydration side. Hydration is so important. We do not want them getting dehydrated. Urinary tract infections, most of us on this have heard about them and understand that symptomatically there is a wide range of the kinds of symptoms, and they're not always necessarily going to be pointing directly at dehydration. So take that out of the equation.
All right. Are we ready for tip 7?
We are ready for tip 7.
So tip 7 is about injecting yourself in the process and eventually taking over feeding and responsibility for their hydration.
Yes.
And let me kind of talk you through how this will likely unfold. First, you will begin prompting them. Have another bite of your pancakes. Then you'll begin, notice they'll eat like half of their meal, and then they seem to have lost interest, but it's half of what they would normally have eaten. So they can't be full. At that point, you might need to restart the process. So dip a couple of pieces of pancake on your fork, hand it to them, or feed it to them. Sometimes you could just hand them the fork and they'll start back up again, or begin feeding them, and then they'll pick that process back up again. Eventually, you'll be doing the lion's share of all the feeding. Well, eventually you'll be doing all the feeding. But that will gradually increase how much you have to be the one physically feeding them.
Right.
You'll also be stopping periodically, either handing them, saying, take a little drink, or handing them the glass, or eventually taking the glass up to their lips so they can drink some. So feeding and hydrating will roll into your complete responsibility.
Exactly. And when that does, and again, let's kind of walk back on the observing and adjusting part of that, is that early in the process, one of the things that we could be doing is, for example, with my care receivers, depending on how the table where we ate was structured, you're usually sitting across the table from them. Sometimes you're sitting around the corner from them, but each of you is in the middle of the side and whatever it is. I began moving closer to my care receiver. So I was either really catty corner to them and just visiting with them. And then, so it was easier to interject myself when it needed to be done. And then also to prompt them and all of the things of the face. So you're getting closer to them. And I did it so gradually, they didn't really even notice.
That's really important, Sue. Totally important. Think about this. At some point, you're going to be wanting to hand them the fork or give them a couple of bites or whatever it is they're trying to eat. Position yourself before you have to do that. Change your position in the table so that, number one, if you're right-handed or left-handed, you're positioned in a way that's comfortable for you to be giving them, feeding them.
That's so important.
And then make sure that it's great to do it, as Sue did, before it even becomes a challenge, so that it's just one less dramatic thing that's happening at the same time.
It is. And what I had observed is that when, for example, let's say your caregiver dropped a bite of food, and early in the journey, that might be,
and you don't have a dog.
And you don't have a dog, and you leap up to go to make it easier for them.
Right.
Well, that's overwhelming for them because all of a sudden something's changed, and you're coming toward them, and you're not at eye level with them anymore, and they can feel threatened. And so the easier you make this process and the more gradual you make it, the easier it's going to be for them. This is just all the things that you're like, I wouldn't have even known to think about these in the beginning. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay. We ready for some final thoughts?
I think we are.
As many of the topics that Sue and I discuss, the first things that you're going to do is observe, because we want to respect the way your care receiver goes through the process.
Yeah.
That'll make things less confusing for them and less frustrating for them when you're taking over the process and all the steps in between.
Right.
We're going to prompt. Then we're going to inject ourselves in the process. And then we're going to eventually take over the process. Right. And also remember, this is not just about eating. This is also about drinking.
Absolutely.
Because hydration is key. Now, give yourself a lot of grace through this process because things are changing. That's always very frustrating. Give your care receiver a lot of grace in this process. I'm sure they would rather be feeding themselves and rather drinking themselves.
Absolutely.
Of course, if you have tips, in addition to these tips, we'd love to hear about them. Please go out to our Facebook page or our Instagram page. Those links are in the show notes, and put your tips out there for other people to see. If you like this podcast, please subscribe or follow on whatever platform you listen to this podcast on, and please rate and review this podcast as well. Any products that we mentioned will also be links in the show notes as well.
Yeah. We're all on this journey together.
Yes, we are.